Guarantee Trust Bank, or GTBank as it's popularly known, is a Nigerian multinational corporation that was founded in 1990. It has a reputation for offering a wide range of financial services and products, underpinned by the values of customer accessibility and communication. Now, amid fears the global economy is in danger of slipping into a recession, it's companies like GTBank that will play an essential role in navigating the way through any potential difficulties. So how will it do it? Well, I'm delighted to welcome to the studio Ade Adebiyi. Now, he's the CEO and Managing Director of GTBank's operations in Sierra Leone. So welcome to the studio. And let's start first with the history of the bank, because it's been quite a journey since 1990. How did the bank come about, and where were the gaps in the market?
Thank you, Julia, for having me once again this year. Guarantee Trust Bank history started in 1990 with 42 shareholders, initial capital of $2 million. The idea was to create a truly professional organization, kind of like an oasis in a country where things were not being done properly, and perhaps maybe not being done properly now. In most parts of the world, if you say you want to set up an organization based on integrity, that's a given. In Nigeria, that's probably not a given. And so from the onset of the group, the idea was to build an organization based on whose core values are based on integrity. And it worked. The business model worked. In 1996, 6 years after operations started, the bank was listed by introduction on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Two prominent business schools, one in the UK, Cranfield, and the other in the US, have done several case studies on the bank.
And the American one being Harvard.
Harvard. On the bank, on how you do business in a country like Nigeria ethically. Those case studies are widely read. So between 1990 when we started and 2000, things went exceptionally well. In 2001, the bank did its initial public offering to raise capital.
Basically floating.
Floating capital. And subsequently, we also got our universal banking license. Now, without claiming to understand the Nigerian market, as a young organization, you want to take risks. We started our regional expansion in Africa, and we expanded we thought we would do our expansion to an Anglophone West African country where they speak English. So it would be easier to make your mistakes.
Sure.
We started with a small country like Gambia. Gambia, 1.2 million population. So that if you made any mistake, people would not notice. It worked. Subsequently, some time after, we set up, Gambia was in 2002. Shortly after, we opened GTBank Sierra Leone. That was the birth of GTBank Sierra Leone. And that also worked. In 2004, we went back to the market to raise additional capital through another public offering. That was successful because as you get bigger, like I said, the regional expansion had started. As you get bigger, you need more capital to do your business. And so that was successful. In 2006, we went to Ghana. That was the third country now in West Africa.
So this is the Anglophone countries.
Anglophone countries. We went to Ghana. In 2008, we came to the UK. The UK...
Just as Anglophone as you can get.
Yes. In 2008, we came to the UK, and the idea of coming to the UK, it was the first subsidiary out of Africa. The idea of coming to the UK was not to compete with the high street banks. It was more to take advantage of the connectivity between West Africa and the UK. And in the process, leverage on the business that was coming out of our African subsidiaries. So essentially between 2008 and 2015, things went very well. In 2007, we were a bit braver. We did our first Eurobond in the UK here.
How did that go?
we raised $350 million.
Was that in excess of what you thought you'd get?
Yes, it was in excess of what we thought we'd get. Subsequently, in August 2007, we listed on the London Stock Exchange with initial capital of $825 million. That was another success. Now, it was done 1 week before the financial crisis. So if you ask me, did we know about the financial crisis? I'll tell you it was sheer luck. Because if we had done that deal 1 week after, it probably would not have succeeded.
Sure.
In 2009, we expanded into Liberia, another subsidiary in Liberia. After 2009, in 2012, we went to Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire was the first Francophone country.
This is the Ivory Coast.
Ivory Coast. It was the first Francophone, and that was done in 2012. So that was done in 2012. Subsequently, after that, so after we had done the Anglophone West Africa, we had done one country in Francophone. The next thing we did was to acquire a bank in 2014 in East Africa that had operations in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. And subsequently, in 2017, we expanded into Tanzania. So that's the African footprint.
Sure, it's getting bigger all the time.
Yes, it's the African footprint of the group. And today, in 9 countries, we have 9 countries in Africa, Nigeria, and the UK. We have 300 branches plus, which is the African footprint and the group as a whole of GTBank.
And before we look at that footprint in a little bit more detail, just hearing the history, there is this sense that you guys were like upstarts because you were being told setting up a bank in Nigeria and along ethical lines, that's nonsense. But you said, is it? So here you are kicking back. You're being very strategic as well. You're going to countries which have got a very strong Anglophone influence and then coming to the UK itself. Disruptive behaviour, but in a very popular, interesting way, subverting the idea of being an upstart in some respects.
I'll tell you that the early days were actually very challenging because the norm was that you could not do business ethically in Nigeria.
Because of the country's reputation, basically.
But subsequently, with the successes, the business model paid. Sometimes there were challenges, definitely challenges, but the key thing that the group did was to stick to its principles of integrity. And at some point, it affected, but eventually, on the long term, it paid off for the bank, as you can see.
Yeah, exactly, because you've got that big footprint. And I want to look at that footprint in a bit more detail, because how are you helping people on the ground, the communities who go to you? Because clearly they trust you, and it's really cementing that relationship with the practical things on the ground. So what are you doing?
In terms of corporate social responsibility, as a group, in Sierra Leone as a group, and also as a group, we believe that we don't just make profits out of organization, out of countries. So one of our key principles is to give back to societies where we operate. In GTBank Sierra Leone, for instance, we have 4 pillars of our corporate social responsibility, CSR. We have health, we have the environment, we have community development, and we have the education. But clearly, over the years, we have focused on the educational sector, and we have been involved and supporting a lot of construction projects that provide classroom blocks for primary and secondary schools. So we build these blocks and we donate them to primary and secondary schools to aid education, because we believe that education is the bedrock, the foundation of economic development. So we always like to play in that field. We also have, so in 2018, a new government was elected in Sierra Leone. One of their key principles was to provide free education.
So that chimes nicely with what you're doing, your aspirations.
Exactly. And so we were very excited when we heard about that. And we have supported the government in providing educational materials to both the primary, secondary schools as a way of our own contribution and giving back to the society. In terms of the environment, about 2 years ago, there was the issue of the mudslide in Sierra Leone. It was widely publicized. We're in the forefront of actually giving support to people who are affected, resettling them to ensure that they are able to integrate back into the society. In terms of community development, we are very strong with providing financial assistance for the disabled organizations towards their welfare and livelihood. And in terms of health, we have also provided financial assistance to some cancer patients.
Sure, so sponsoring initiatives as well.
Sponsoring them, paying for their hospital bills, providing drugs for them, towards integrating and rehabilitating them.
So this is a bank which follows a social enterprise as well.
Precisely.
Yeah. And when you look at the Sierra Leone, obviously you've done a huge amount of work on the ground, again, cementing that relationship. But if we look at the banking sector generally, how competitive is it? Because I assume that because you've got that footprint, you're not just fulfilling your objectives as a bank, it also means you can do more in the community, really riding that competitiveness. But what's the sector like generally?
Thank you, Juliet. There are 13 banks operating, commercial banks operating in Sierra Leone. When you compare that to the size of the economic activity, I wouldn't say we are overbanked. But then again, if I compare, giving some numbers now, Sierra Leone has a GDP of about $4 billion, and it has 13 banks. On the other hand, Gambia has a GDP of $1 billion and has 15 banks. So I would say we are probably underbanked, Sierra Leone. But when you compare to another economy like Guinea, Guinea has a GDP of $10 billion and they have 15 banks. Then are you overbanked? But in terms of competition in the industry, what has happened is that most of the 13 banks concentrate on the top and middle corporate sector. And so that's where you have the competition. And if you look at the size of the economy in Sierra Leone, the competition in that top segment is quite competitive there. When you also look at the fact that over the past few years, there's been significant drop in commodity prices, namely iron ore. It has affected the FX requirements in the country, depreciation of the currency.
Sure.
And because the banks are the providers of foreign exchange in the country, there's tendency, not only because of the impact it will have on the profitability of the banks, but also their FX requirements. They prefer to play on that top segment. However, the bottom segment, the retail segment, you have huge opportunities there. Just playing with some numbers now. You have 13 banks. The total number of customers, unique customers across the banking sector, 700,000. Population of 7.4 million people. That gives you a financial inclusion of about 9%. So there is scope in the retail segment, which is where most people should be playing. The government have a financial inclusion policy, which they put in place in 2009. That has achieved a lot of strides, but the challenges that you have there are things like the literacy level, the dependence of cash. People believe they don't have to open bank accounts. In ICT, and also the country does not have a national switch. A national switch being a system that interconnects all the banks.
Right, which we all take for granted, of course.
Take for granted, you know. So top segment, I would say, really competitive. Below, a lot of scope there, less competition. But guess who is coming to the retail space now? You have the telcos, the telecommunication companies.
They've suddenly woken up to it effectively.
Yes, so they have mobile wallets, which is essentially a bank. So from your phone, you can actually make payment, utility payments.
But they've still got to get the trust of the customers, particularly with new technology.
They actually already have the trust, because just looking at some numbers again, the telecommunication companies have total subscriber base of about 5.6 million. That's about 75% of the population.
And that's across all ages?
Across all ages. And those subscribers have the potential of having mobile wallets. So that's competition there. The fintechs are also there, less prominent, but the banks should realize, and they should wake up to the fact that their competition is not only the other banks, the fintechs,
yes,
and also the telecommunications
because they can take over some of the functions traditionally associated with banking.
Precisely.
But you're well positioned, from what you've told me, to really work with that because of where you are, because of that market that you specifically targeted.
Yes, in terms of branch network, we have one of the largest branch networks in the country, so we can take advantage of retail banking. Apart from that, you're not going to do retail banking by brick and mortar and opening branches. It's going to be expensive. We've invested heavily in technology infrastructure.
Well, the virtual banking, basically.
Yes, online banking, virtual banking. You need technology investments to be able to do that. We've invested heavily in technology. Agency banking is another big thing, which the bank is also looking at to increase the size of its customer base, which is what the government wants. So you have 700,000 customers now across the bank. Ideally, in a country like that, when you compare to similar economies, it should be about 30–40%.
Give it time, you're getting there.
Yes.
You're getting there. But everything that you've said leads quite nicely to this quote from the chairman of GTB's board of directors, a man I'm sure you're very familiar with, Dr. Emerson George Taylor Lewis. Now, he recently said the bank has experienced significant growth in its market share because it has a customer-centric approach to business operations. So in terms of defining the customer-centric approach, part of that would embrace technology because, again, that's bringing together traditional methods of banking with new methods of banking. But what else does it involve? If you had to define customer-centric, what is it from your perspective?
Okay, one of the things that we usually do is that before we release any products into the market, is actually based on extensive research on customer behavior and our customer needs. And so by the time we release the products, it actually takes care of particular challenges which the customers have. I'll give you an example. One of our key products, which we released about 3 years ago, is called GTBank. GTBank is a mobile application. It's mobile banking, essentially. Because of the low earning power of the population in Sierra Leone, a lot of people cannot afford data, internet. Now, the product we have can enable you to do banking transactions without connecting to the internet. And so it's a very apt product for that environment. And we launched that product in 2015. It's been a success.
Huge take-up.
Yes, been a huge success. And that was actually doing a research. What does the customer want? We launched that product. We have other products that are targeted to, for instance, teenagers, which is a product that has features to encourage them to save. So we try to encourage them to save from a very young age. We have a product for people over 60. That product does not have any banking charges. It's called
free banking.
Free banking. And the reason why we launched that into the market is because we know that at that particular age bracket, their earning power has started to diminish. And you want to, as much as possible, be responsible to that segment of the population.
But it's really important to manage money. You're getting older, and obviously the costs that go with that.
Definitely. So we waived all the charges on such accounts. So once you're over 60, you don't pay any charges. So these are some of the customer-centric products that we have. But we actually go beyond that. We also try to make recommendations to the regulator on how we believe the banking environment should be improved.
That's quite unusual, really, isn't it? A banker working with the regulators.
Oh, well, yes, it's unusual, but sometimes you do it in order to improve the system. One of the key things, recommendations we had recently was trying to segment KYC requirements. So a lot of the accounts, if you want to promote financial inclusion, you're going to have a lot of people in the bottom of the retail market wanting to open accounts. Most of them do not pass huge amounts of money through their account. So we made a recommendation to the regulator that we should segment the KYC requirements. So we have what you call Tier 1 accounts. Tier 1 accounts are bottom retail accounts where the balances in the account don't exceed $500, and each transaction is no more than $50. That recommendation was taken on board.
So low-income earners, effectively.
Yeah, so we try to do that, and it's been positive. The bank has a positive perception. You have a good rapport and relationship with the regulator, and it's what we'll continue to do to continue to scope the market and actually observe our customers, what do they want in actually bringing out.
And being aware of demographic trends as well, because clearly what one generation of people expect from the bank may be slightly different to what the generation behind expects.
Yeah, which is essentially what we have done with the seniors accounts for the older people, the teen accounts for the people who want
the grandchildren, basically.
Yeah,
so working across all the generations. And let's move away from the bank to focus on you. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that you've been the CEO and Managing Director of GTB Sierra Leone since 2018, January. Yeah?
That's correct.
So well done. It's over a year's worth of good service. So in the time that you've been running the ship, what do you regard as your greatest achievement? It's a very unfair question, I know, but
well, if
you had to pin it down, what would you say it is?
Yeah, it's very unfair, but look, I can sit down here and take credit for the good performance of the bank, but I always feel that the performance of the bank is largely boils down to teamwork. I think it's the dedication, the hard work of those staff out there, the management under the direction of the board, teamwork to actually achieve this. But in terms of performance, since I came in 2018, there was a profit before tax, a 40% growth, profit before tax, $10 million. That grew from $7.3 million in 2017. Customer base, customer deposits also grew by 21%. And we have several awards, one of which is what we're discussing here. From the European, we got 2.
Yes, you've done very well.
Best digital innovation. We also got the one for best financial inclusion program. But even beyond the European, the global banking and finance, we actually got an award for the fastest growing retail bank in Sierra Leone. The international banker, without actually saying this in the European interview, also gave us the best commercial bank in Sierra Leone, and also the fastest in digital banking products. The Asian banker also awarded us with a product for the retail services. And that product I told you about, the mobile banking, actually won the best digital innovation product in West Africa, not just Sierra Leone. And so these are some of the achievements within this period. Yes, I am at the top of the organization, but I believe that a lot is teamwork. Yes, under my direction, but I also need to give credit to my team.
Absolutely, and certainly I've met you before, and you strike me as one of these people who can never sit still, that you can't just think, okay, we've done this, we can afford to take our foot off the gas, we can still do a lot better. Is that fair?
That is 100%. And when we look at what we are doing in the future, I think most of these awards actually testify to the fact that we're doing things properly. So we would continue to work with our customers. How do we treat them? Continue to do that. Risk management systems. It's very key because one of the things in the Sierra Leone market is there's a high level of non-performing loans. Banks' main income line is to book loans, apart from commissions you make from services. But you need to book loans. And you book loans, but you need to be careful. If you book those loans and they are bad loans,
Sure,
it could
quality
actually...
of the recipient of those loans.
Yes, it could actually affect your performance in the future. So for us, it's key for us to continue to strengthen our risk management systems to make sure that our non-performing loans are actually reduced to the barest minimum. Currently, our non-performing loan ratios is actually well below the average of the industry.
Sure, so you're safe and you need to keep it at that safe level.
I think that's the key thing. Not just to be safe now, but to keep it at that level. But for the future, what we want to do is to expand our retail footprint. Currently, out of that 700,000 customers industry-wide, we have about 170,000 of them. Our aspirations, our goal in the next 5 years is to ensure that our retail footprint is actually increased to 1 million in the next 5 years. That might be something that, like a tall order, coming from where we are, because...
Why do you think that could be a tall order, though, in light of what you've done from 1990 to where we are now?
Well, we're talking about Sierra Leone now. So Sierra Leone started in 2002. And from when we started up till now, we have 170,000 customers. But I think the key thing is that things are going to be done differently. So people would open accounts through brick and mortar, going to the banking hall to open accounts. But with technology, one of the things we're looking at is the ability to be able to open accounts on your phone. That's one. So things are now being done differently. So if you have built over the past years, 2002 to 2019, 17 years, you have a customer base of 170,000. You don't want to extrapolate because things are going to be done differently.
Sure.
So in the next 5 years, we're looking at having 1 million customers. And that's because the opening of accounts and customers is going to be technology assisted. And also through agency banking, which is another way of providing banking services through third parties. Yeah.
I mean, look, it sounds like a really exciting journey, and I have a suspicion that if you and I meet again in a few years' time, that you'll have reached that 1 million. Anything's possible, and especially with technology behind you as well. Nothing is off limits. But Ade Adebiyi, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing about the journey of this bank, not just in its entirety, but also specifically in the Sierra Leone market. And congratulations on the awards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.